You're live.
So, hello everyone, and thank you again for attending the ACEEE Energy Efficiency and Climate Forum. Today's panel, our next panel, will be focusing on cross-cutting issues and some general energy efficiency issues that I think you'll find very interesting. Again, my name is Dave Calabrese. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Affairs with the Daikin Corporation here in Washington, D.C. Just quickly before we start, I think you've all had the housekeeping announcements already, but just to remind you, your screen is customizable. Please save your questions for the Zoom session. You can feel free to put them in the Q&A in this format also, and we can use them if we have some time after this session, but we'll be going into the Zoom to do most of that Q&A, and we could carry over some of those questions if we have a good number of them. We are going to be having a recording made of this, and so you'd be able to see this in the future. So with that, I'd just like to briefly mention the names of our distinguished panel. You have their bios with more details as to their backgrounds and expertise, but we have three individuals who are, I think, are going to provide a very interesting discussion of some of the key cross-cutting issues. Brendan Haley, Policy Director from Efficiency Canada. Next will be Samuel Thernstrom, the founder and CEO of the Energy Innovation Reform Project. And then finally, Khalil Shahid, Senior Policy Advocate with NRDC, or the National Resources Defense Council. So with that, I'd just like to start with Brendan, and who will present the Canadian experience with carbon pricing. Brendan?
Great, thank you. Pleased to join you here from Canada. So I'm the policy director for an organization we just launched 2 years ago. We're a research and advocacy organization. We're learning a lot of lessons and copying and amplifying a lot of the good ideas from the ACEEE. But today I'm tasked with lending some lessons from Canada with respect to our experience with carbon pricing policies. And I don't have slides. I think it's a bit easier at the end of the day to kind of tell you a story. So I'm going to walk you through a policy history that starts with front-runner provinces leading then to a federal carbon pricing system, which we have in Canada right now. And I'll close with some thoughts on how energy efficiency programs and carbon pricing policies have interacted. So even though carbon pricing was discussed at the federal level for some time in Canada, I think similar to the US, it was really the provinces that acted as frontrunners. Probably the best known carbon tax is in British Columbia, so on the West Coast, where they implemented a fuel tax in 2008. It started at $10 per ton, and it's now up to $40 per ton. Now, the revenues from this tax were initially fully rebated in the form of tax credits. And I should say this carbon tax came as a bit of a surprise. First is that it was implemented very quickly. And actually, you can implement a carbon tax very quickly. You can just announce it in a budget, while a cap and trade system usually takes a longer period of design and consultation. This tax was also implemented by a conservative-leaning government. It's a bit confusing, especially for Americans, because actually the party that implemented this tax goes under the name Liberal. But trust me, it's actually a right-of-center coalition party in BC. The other front-runner provinces were Quebec. So Quebec is linked with California in a cap-and-trade system. And that stemmed from the discussions under the Western Climate Initiative that were occurring between states and provinces. Those revenues are almost exclusively used for sustainable transportation quite a bit, as well as energy efficiency programs in areas like housing. Alberta was another front-runner province. They implemented an industrial intensity-based regulatory system, and then they implemented a full carbon fee when a more left-wing government was elected. And that carbon fee led to the creation of an agency called Energy Efficiency Alberta that ran really some of the first energy efficiency programs in that province. And finally, Ontario also created a cap and trade system, as well as a new agency to spend those revenues, but that was actually quite short-lived. So with all these provincial initiatives, we then saw the introduction of a federal system with the election of a Liberal government in 2015 nationally. And they designed a system where front-runner provinces could maintain their policies and which encouraged other provinces to design their own systems. So if a province did not have a carbon pricing system or had one that the federal government deemed to be inadequate by looking at either the level of their carbon tax or the expected reductions from their cap and trade system, in those cases, these provinces would face what's called a backstop, where the federal government would essentially impose a carbon price on that province or territory. So the backstop is based on a climate levy on fossil fuels, starting at $10 per ton in 2018 and increasing to $50 per ton in 2022. Now, for large industry, there's a different system. It's called an output-based system, where industry must pay a carbon price if they fail to meet fuel-specific GHG intensity benchmarks. So the vast majority of the revenues from the fuel tax in these backstop provinces are used for direct rebates to households. And what remains of those revenues is primarily used for energy efficiency. So thus far, that has led to a focus on energy efficiency in schools in these backstop provinces. And there are also rebates available for small and medium-sized businesses to implement energy efficiency, fuel switching, as well as some renewable energy projects. So the provincial reactions to this federal system was quite interesting. You got a whole bunch of strategic maneuvering. So some of the smaller provinces and territories opted to go under the federal system in whole or in part because it's just administratively simple. You had some other provinces, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Labrador. They imposed a carbon tax, but then they reduced their fuel taxes to sort of offset the impact. Nova Scotia is another small province that actually created its own closed cap and trade system. Manitoba had an interesting approach where they proposed a $25 per ton carbon tax. So that would have been, and to keep it at that level. So that would have been higher than the federal price initially, but then lower over time. And then other provinces decided to take the government to court, the federal government to court. And that includes Alberta and Ontario, which by this time were under conservative governments that canceled their carbon prices and thus fell under this federal backstop system. So in Canada right now, every single province or territory is under some sort of carbon price. There are different flavors to each system. It's perhaps a bit messy. There's no uniform price or streamlined approach, but it is comprehensive. Next, I want to talk a bit about the implications for energy efficiency policy. So certainly when carbon price revenues are used to support further emission reduction initiatives, energy efficiency features quite prominently. In Alberta, almost the entire energy efficiency program was funded through their carbon tax. We also saw the creation of something called the Green Ontario Fund, which was aiming to be sort of a one-stop shop and promoter of market transformation and fuel switching. But both of those organizations have since been shut down as new governments were elected that oppose the carbon price. So we see greater political stability in Quebec. And I think there that's because there's a consensus amongst all the parties in the province in favor of the policy. But they also have a governance system with multiple revenue streams to support efficiency initiatives, and carbon pricing is really only one part of it. So in Quebec, they have utility ratepayer programs, as well as a long-standing charge on all fuels that has supported government-run programs for a number of years. So the carbon pricing revenues are really built on top of this long history of both utility and government efficiency programming. So the lesson here, perhaps obvious, is that a carbon price can boost efficiency efforts, but you might not want to be completely dependent on those carbon pricing revenues. I'd like to finish really with some questions that we're asking about how energy efficiency and carbon pricing can complement one another and bolster climate action. First, a lot of the jurisdictions that introduced carbon pricing, there was really a political imperative to show immediate benefits from the revenues. So both in, say, Ontario and Alberta, one province with no history of efficiency program, the other province with a long history, a lot of the initial measures that were supported were more widespread, things like lighting and smart thermostats. Now, over time, I think there's an opportunity to use carbon pricing revenues to achieve deeper savings, perhaps break down some of the silos you see between fuel-specific utilities to support longer-term market transformation. And we see this to some extent in Quebec, where a lot of the revenue is used for transportation, and some of it's also now being used for heating electrification. The other point is that the lessons that come from our experience with energy efficiency program delivery, primarily through utilities, are quite important when it comes to spending carbon pricing revenue wisely. One thing my organization is trying to emphasize to the federal government in particular is that there's a whole network of experts in program design, program evaluation that can help make sure these emission reduction programs work well. And finally, I guess I'd just say that the politics of introducing this federal system is a few years behind us. Those debates, sucked up a lot of oxygen. And it is nice, at least now, there's a little bit more room to talk about other types of policies that we need, such as zero emission vehicle mandates, building codes, significant ramp ups and building retrofits. So there's my quick take on our experience with carbon pricing thus far in Canada. Very happy to chat about it later on.
Thank you, Brendan. And yeah, we'll have some time again, maybe after this session or in the Zoom call to get some more detail on some of the items you discussed. So our next speaker is Samuel Thernstrom, who is going to speak on innovation and federal clean energy standard. Samuel?
Thanks very much. I hope everyone can see me and hear me. Speaking through Zoom is an unusual way to do things. I'm not seeing myself on the full screen, but I hope I'm coming up to all of you. So I'm going to be talking about a piece of proposed legislation that is much broader than the narrow topic of energy efficiency that we're focused on, but it does have important implications for efficiency. So I hope folks find this interesting, and I'll apologize in advance. I will, to Brendan, I will take a mild shot at carbon taxing because I believe that's a less viable approach in the current American political context. So this is a policy approach to moving things forward legislatively in the current American Congress that is a little different from what folks have heard of previously. So I hope people find it interesting. Let's see if I can advance the slides. Yes. So just to get into this topic, initially, I would offer some broad points of agreement that I see among policy people in Washington today about what the road forward is for legislative policy on climate policy. Obviously, the new administration is expected to push a lot of executive actions as soon as possible. But I think most people who follow this issue agree that if we want really transformational changes in the sector, we need legislation that can be bipartisan, so it can be durable, and durable so that it can actually have transformative effects over time. And so if you're looking at a path forward, I think there's a broad consensus among many Washington policymakers today and the people like me who work with them and follow these issues. Congress is not especially interested in a one-size-fits-all approach to climate policy. There's a general agreement that looking at different sectors and establishing policies that are tailored to the needs of those sectors is a better way to go about it. So that's one area that I think is different from a carbon pricing approach. There's also a broad agreement among both parties that innovation policy is very important. Our goal is not simply to deploy all the technologies we have today, but to, in fact, improve the technology toolkit that we have available to us. And perhaps a less uniformly broad consensus, but still a significant appreciation among people who work in this space that regulations are needed as well as innovation. You can't do it just with one piece. And so the proposal that I'm here to talk about, McKinley Schrader, puts together those pieces in a unique way, combining a period of innovation with a transition to a regulatory policy. As I say at the bottom of this slide, for those who can see it, I think the specifics of the targets, the timetables, exactly how you combine these innovation programs, those are things that people are going to be arguing about a lot in Washington in the next couple of years. But I think the general framework of approaching the issue through these basic building blocks is increasingly agreed upon. I would say I think that it's interesting that cap and trade policy, which is very popular in this country, say a decade ago, is really not a focus of policymakers today. And I also don't think carbon pricing is something that Congress is likely to take up. It's notable that House Republicans are unanimous in their opposition to that. And in fact, even among Democrats in the House, Chairman Pallone in the Energy and Commerce Committee is not moving a pricing approach to things. He's actually interested in a clean energy standard, which is exactly the approach we're going to talk about today. No offense to Brendan and the carbon taxers working in Canada, but just America's politics on this are obviously different. So moving along, I think a lot of people have some understandable hesitation to believe that we can actually legislate on climate policy after so many years of failure. And so I just want to quickly make the case for why I think it is possible that Congress, even this closely divided Congress, even if Republicans maintain the Senate majority, could actually come together. And I think the path forward depends upon recognizing what we've actually been fighting about and realizing that there are solutions to those problems. These are not insurmountable obstacles. We don't simply need one party to outvote the other. We could actually have the parties agree upon policies that would address legitimate concerns. And so in my mind, we've been fighting about essentially three things historically. One, the cost of clean power. It's been too high. People don't want to pay for it. Secondly, the fuel diversity question. Environmental policies have often disfavored nuclear power and carbon capture, and that obviously creates pushback from key stakeholders. And thirdly, in America, obviously, we've had a very contested question of the Clean Air Act authority. And the Obama administration proposed the Clean Power Plan. The Supreme Court put a hold on that. Trump administration pulled it back. And so even my friends who are the biggest enthusiasts of the Clean Air Act recognize that and that legislation to establish that authority in a clear way would be beneficial. And so that's essentially what we have been working to try to do. We want to cut the cost of clean through innovation, and I think we see very vividly that that is possible. There's been a lot of reporting, even just within the last week, as well as in the many months before this, about how renewable prices have come down dramatically. That's not an accident. That's a result of innovation programs like the DOE Sunshot program. It's also the result of policies that have demanded deployment of renewables, such as state renewable portfolio policies and clean energy standards. So we think you can reduce the cost of these technologies very significantly by combining technology push and demand pull programs in a synergistic way. And we just need to do that across the technology portfolio rather than just within the few sectors that have received appropriate attention till now. And so I would just emphasize that I do believe that policies designed to address these objections can garner a bipartisan majority, which could lead to ambitious legislation that would be durable and therefore transformative. That's certainly our hope. So just to give you a little more specifics to get into the McKinley Schrader legislation in particular. So my organization has been working on this concept of combining innovation and regulation for a number of years now, 7 going on 8, I guess, since our founding. The important step forward has been at the beginning of 2020. Representative David McKinley from West Virginia, who was the chairman of the Coal Caucus, strong supporter of fossil fuels, and Kurt Schrader, Democrat from Oregon, together agreed upon a kind of legislative framework and approach to this policy. They announced that partnership on January 30th. They started working with stakeholders to draft the actual legislation, and they released proposed legislative language on September 17th, which is out now there for public comment. And anyone who's listening to this and would like to provide input, we're past the official public comment stage, but of course we would still welcome comments from anyone. Be a long time before Congress enacts anything, so there will be plenty of time to think further about the details of this. Just to get into some of the more specifics of what the legislative approach is, there are 4 main titles to the bill at the moment. The first 3 titles work on the innovation side of the question. I'm not going to walk you through all of the details because I don't think we have the time, and I think it might be a little boring for some to be in the weeds, but we can take up specifics in the breakout session for anyone who's interested. But I would say, just broadly speaking, the approach of most legislative approaches to innovation programs in Congress today have been a lot of relatively small ball approaches. Don't do too much because it'll cost too much and it'll create too much pushback. And what we said when we were putting these programs together was, if we're going to have very ambitious federal clean energy standards that would decarbonize the economy, we need a full set of technologies that are really working within 10 years. And so this is much more of a swing for the fences approach to the innovation challenge than other policies. So we talk about doing things like building as much as 15 gigawatts of carbon capture and utilization on power plants within 10 years. Demonstrating 5 different types of advanced nuclear reactors so that utilities could have an opportunity to buy proven advanced nuclear technology, not be asked to shoulder the expense of demonstrating those technologies themselves. And in the renewables and efficiency space, there's a whole host of ambitious programs. Many of you probably, remember the DOE Sunshot program that was so successful. So, this would essentially be a wind shot, an efficiency shot, a geothermal shot. Go down the list. We would try to provide these different technologies, a storage shot, with the level of support they need, with the goal that 10 years after enactment, the idea would be to have cost-competitive clean energy technologies for all fuels. Will we necessarily succeed? No, but I think if you take that full portfolio approach, you have a good chance of getting to at least a reasonable toolkit of working policy options. The 4th title is the Federal Clean Energy Standard and its relationship to the Clean Air Act. And it's, again, I don't want to spend too much time on the details here. I can take it up with people in the breakout session if they're interested. But the important point is that we would transition from this contested and weak authority of under the Clean Air Act and establish instead a federal clean energy standard modeled very much on state renewable portfolio standards, only obviously technology neutral, technology inclusive, so any carbon-free technology qualifies. And the standard would take effect under this proposed legislation 10 years after enactment. And so that's an important element of the legislation that provides people who are not prepared to regulate tomorrow a way to come at this regulation question through a softer approach. It's a transitional period. If you'll bear with me in another minute or two, I'll get to a slide where I show you the emissions reductions that are projected. The important thing to understand, a lot of people, hear me say, the Clean Energy Standard doesn't have a compliance period until 10 years out. And so they figure, well, that means we're doing nothing for 10 years. Nothing could be further than the truth. The program is designed to bring down emissions sharply right from the beginning. And if it fails to do that, then the Clean Air Act is still available to us as a tool, but so we don't take it off the books, but we suspend its enforcement until it's available and until this program either is shown to work or not. So, I want to keep moving along pretty quickly. I'm running low on time, and I want to make sure I don't jam up Khalil, who's our next speaker. But I do want to just, quickly show you a couple slides of the modeling of this program so that if people can see, this question of the emissions reductions attainable under this program is really crucial. The slide I've got up here now shows on the left hand the projected emissions under this program. On the right-hand side, it compares the emissions reductions from McKinley Schrader to other policy proposals that have been out there. Obviously, I don't think people can see this super clearly, but I hope they would understand. On the slide on the left, the red line is business as usual. The next line down, the blue line, are the emissions reductions attainable through innovation policies alone. So that's the point I've been making about those first 10 years. Emissions drop very sharply because we're paying to reduce them. And the green line, the deepest reductions line, is what the McKinley Schrader proposal would do, which is combine the innovation programs with a regulatory standard. And shows, therefore, these innovation programs pay off in a big way, but you can't get there from here without the regulatory proposal as well. So you need both pieces. The figure on the right, the important thing is just, the green line is the McKinley Schrader proposal. It shows, compared to other policy proposals, Waxman-Markey, Paris commitments, and so forth, this policy delivers more reductions. So it's a new way to come at deep emissions reductions. Just very quickly, again, because I'm running short on time, I did want to show the other unique thing that's different about the slides I'm showing here are two different approaches to costs. The red line is a conventional regulatory-only policy where, of course, you find that prices rise as the stringency of reductions increases. The line that shows falling costs is the McKinley Schrader proposal, and that's the basic magic of innovation. If you can invest in reducing technology costs, then the cost of turning over the fleet and actually achieving these reductions can be a negative cost. We can retire old, inefficient, polluting assets and replace them with new ones that are actually cheaper. We get to clean while people are paying less, not more. To me, that's a pretty unifying policy. Next slide just shows that electricity prices remain very low. In fact, the policy in the out years may lower them, and that we maintain a high level of fuel diversity within the system, which is, I think, important both for the affordability and reliability of the system, but also for the politics of it. As I said, if the road to federal clean policy in the United States is no nukes, no fossil, no carbon capture, all renewables, that's a very divisive message, and one that Republicans are going to have a hard time accepting. If we can show a picture of how we can get to a fuel-diverse, low-cost, clean energy system, I think that's something that actually even a Republican or half-Republican Congress may well embrace. So sorry if I've gone long. Khalil, I hope I've left you a good chunk of time. So thanks very much. I look forward to your questions in the breakout.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Samuel. And our final presenter is Khalil Shahid, who is going to present on equity in energy efficiency policy. So, Khalil?
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Again, my name is Khalil Shahid, and I'm a senior policy advocate with the Natural Resources Defense Council based in our DC office. I work with a project called Energy Efficiency for All, and if you can see the initial slides here, Energy Efficiency for All is a national partnership between the Energy Foundation, National Housing Trust, NRDC, and Elevate Energy based out of Chicago. And our goal is to ensure and to increase the amount of resources going into the affordable housing sector, particularly the multifamily affordable housing sector, for energy efficiency retrofits. And now increasingly, we are pushing increasingly towards building electrification as well, and complete decarbonization of buildings. But initially, our program started about 7 years ago, just really pushing, working with utility regulators at the state and local level, and working with energy programs through DOE, LIHEAP at the federal level to increase resources and dollars going into servicing the affordable multifamily housing sector. And over that time, we've raised just over $500 million for this sector across our 12 states. and are just, again, continuing to push into new areas with our work, getting more involved into workforce development, getting more involved into the intersections between energy retrofits and healthy homes retrofits. So just continuing to drive this work forward. But a key aspect of our work that's growing, particularly at the federal level, is the engagement of the affordable housing sector and the residential community writ large in our national and state and local discussions around climate policy and the role that energy efficiency can and should play in that. And so again, why energy efficiency? It's the cheapest, lowest risk energy resource. It reduces carbon emissions and produces a host of additional savings and benefits to health, livelihoods, jobs, income. And just can really offer an opportunity for distressed communities, for homes that don't get access to the type of financing that they need to do the type of weatherization and upgrading that they otherwise wouldn't have any interest in. And I apologize that this slide, the formatting is a bit off, but I really wanted to highlight that the residential sector accounted for just over 1,017 million metric tons of in-use CO2 emissions, which is a huge proportion of our national CO2 emissions budget. And residential energy efficiency alone can count for as much as 550 million CO2 equivalent metric tons of emissions reductions annually by 2050 if we make the right investments. And again, these investments have benefits both to climate and climate mitigation strategies, but more importantly, or as importantly, they also, provide direct savings and health benefits to families who need it most. And energy burdens around the country are really difficult, particularly in many of our low-income urban communities and many rural communities across the country. But we also have to, but as we are getting into the issue or the work of integrating residential energy efficiency and climate policy, we also need to understand that housing policy is climate policy. And when we're talking about equity in this context, what we're trying to do to increase the resources financing for energy efficiency retrofits going into the affordable housing sector, we do that in understanding that our housing system is in and of itself broken. And the reason why many of these homes and many of these communities lack the resources to do the regular maintenance and upgrading that we would like to see done in many of these homes and apartment buildings is because our housing finance system is built on a racist structure that devalues Black, Indigenous, and people of color owned property, or people of color majority communities. And so as we are pushing for new investment, for new resources into these communities, we have to be aware of what the structural impact of those new resources are, because we could be pricing out, those families and those communities that we're trying to help with these new resources. And so we have to have a very integrated approach to the way that we pursue residential energy efficiency as a climate strategy. And we need to understand climate policy as being much broader than energy policy, as being much broader than emissions policy, but as being an integrated policy framework that integrates energy policy, integrates efficiency policy with health, but also with housing policy, with policies that expand and maintain the affordability of housing, both in the immediate and in the long term, post-retrofit, post-reconstruction, post-rehabilitation. Because otherwise we're driving new resources and new revenue into a housing system that is structurally skewed against the interest of communities of color and low-income communities in both urban and rural communities. And so unless we're taking all these issues into account and looking at this question holistically, that we can end up doing ourselves much more harm, even as we try to solve for the climate solution. And I will stop there and turn it over and wait for questions, comments, and other input.
Okay. Thank you very much, Khalil. We are done a little early. We do have some questions, but I'm told that it's probably best that we take those questions, which I've received on the Q&A, to the Zoom session, which is a bit more interactive. So with that, we're going to go a few minutes early into the Zoom session. I think everyone hopefully has experience doing that. You have a button on your screen, and please do that, and we'll reconvene in a few minutes over in Zoom. Thank you very much.